and gentlemen, welcome back to UAP Studies Podcast. As you know, we explore every aspect of ufology, every theory, every angle that we can. This subject specifically, I've been very, I would say almost leery on approaching it based on my past. And but today we have the expert that is, in Catholic Church, and he's been exploring the Catholic faith for a very long time. We have none other than Paul Thigpen, and I should say Dr. Paul Thigpen, that joins us today. Paul, I'd like to welcome you to UAP Studies Podcast, my man. This is such a great honor to be able to have you on and to be able to talk about this subject with you, because you're my go-to guy on this.
Jason, the honor is all mine, believe me, and a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I love your backdrop, by the way. It blends in with mine, because on my screen, I'm on the right-hand side. So it almost looks like we're in the same room. It's awesome.
Well, I used to have bookshelves behind me, and then I found out that a lot of viewers were saying, instead of listening, they were looking at the titles. Oh, he's reading that. Okay. So
do you know what?
That's distracting.
And I totally get that, because I judge people by their bookshelves. If I go over somebody's house, I look at their books and I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's mostly, L. Ron James or whatever, Twilight series. We'll have much to talk about. But I love it. I love books. And for some reason, this helps me dampen the sound in the room, which is quite nice. Not that we need it much these days with these mics that we have. So, Paul, I'm going to explain to you why I stayed away from the subject of faith and UAPs or non-human intelligence for quite some time. I had an experience when I was 13, a very close encounter. By the age of 18, I basically became a Christian, a follower of Christ, and I got involved with the church quite heavily. I mean, to the point where I wake up, an hour early every morning just to read the Bible, and I was a worship leader on stage. Like, I did that for 18 years. But in about 2012, my wife and I saw another 3 orbs on the side of the highway that were not human. They didn't act human, and the way they maneuvered wasn't normal. And I got out of the van and I stepped into the field to try to record it. Of course, the camera doesn't capture it. And it all hit me again. I'm like, I dismissed the non-human aspect of things, the possibility of other intelligent life, even though I had a close encounter, because of my faith. And I almost thought that was keeping me not paying attention to maybe the bigger reality. But my faith started deteriorating after that point, to the point where about 2.5 years later, I had to excuse myself from the church and no longer attend, because I had to be honest, and it was a tough 2 years, because people would come up to me and say, oh, you're such a spiritual leader, because I'm on stage singing the song, but I was faking it. And I'm a moral, integral person, and it killed me on the inside. I just couldn't leave them in a lurch, but it killed me, and it was a slow deterioration. So starting the podcast, I have not addressed the faith side of things. I have interviewed people of faith that have had experiences, but I have not faced that myself or made the two connect. So I think you're the guy that's going to help me out with that. Hopefully not too much pressure on your part, my man. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear your story, buddy.
Absolutely. So, Paul, I'm really interested in how you started looking into this, being part of the, I was looking at your resume. I mean, it's quite, you were appointed a lay representative on the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, National Advisory Council. And you went through an atheist stage, approximately the age of 12 to 18, where you sort of stepped away from the church. I think that gave you maybe a possibility of looking into other things. And by the time you came back, it gave you a different perspective. So could you explain to us maybe how that started for you?
Yeah. I mean, as it turns out, even before I became atheist at 12, as a child, younger than that, I'd had an experience. It's not something I can definitely say it was anomalous to me, but well, anyway, I'll just tell you. Excuse me. I used to have a recurring dream that at the time I was still pretty young. This would have been back in the mid 60s, I guess, that I now recognize as the first scene in the classic abduction experience.
Oh,
But
wow.
it was a dream. And what would happen is in a bedroom with my older brother, we shared a double bed. It's kind of a small house. And big window was next to us. It was an old converted living room. So it had a big picture window. And in the dream, I'm lying awake, and all of a sudden, this kind of bluish green light comes down through the window, shines on me, and I'm frozen and paralyzed. Can't move, can't scream. I am able to look over at my brother, and he's still asleep, and then I would wake up. And so I would never claim that that was actually some kind of abduction experience. I don't know where I would have gotten that scenario from. Maybe there was some movie I'd seen at that point, but it wasn't as popular in the media, movies and things at that point, just in the mid-60s. So but that did help to encourage me, somehow kind of made a connection at something this guy. And I had an interest already, but that enhanced it in I'd read about Project Blue Book. I was reading about other things. And so it goes back that far. My interest, when I was a senior in high school, I did have an experience. Again, I don't know exactly how to explain it. I would never claim either of these were definitely ETI, but I'm walking with a couple of friends down the beach. I was raised in Savannah, Georgia. Tybee Island has the beach. And while we're walking, to look up in the sky, and two large, round, what I would now describe as plasma looking figures. They weren't nuts and bolts stuff, but they were glowing in the dark. It was night, glowing in the dark, and kind of red and green mixed in with the white. And we got scared, ran back to the car, drove back to my home about 8 miles away. It seemed to be following us. That could have been some kind of, just how it looked. And then they disappeared when we got home. So again, I didn't know what to make of that. Led into all kinds of other things. But at that point, I was an atheist. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that the interest was there from an early time, even when I was a young Christian, even while I was an atheist. After I came back to faith at the age of 18, then it was in the back of my mind, okay, if I'd read enough to begin to think, I think those things were out there. How do I fit that into my Catholic faith? You don't find something like that necessarily in the Bible, for instance. But it's something, so I dwelt on, meditated on. It was often just in the back of my mind. Many years later, did some beginning research to maybe do a book about it. Didn't have time. I was a professional writer and editor, so to make money, I had to keep going, and all kinds of other projects. But back in so I became Catholic in '93. Back in would have been 2017, I guess, when the New York Times piece appeared that most of your viewers will probably know about, Kane and Blumenthal writing. I read that and I said, oh my goodness, this topic, if this is in the New York Times, this topic has a chance of becoming really important in the public conversation. Maybe it's time I did that book. And then eventually, talking to a friend of mine who had published some of my books, said, you're going to think I need a tinfoil hat, but I really want to write about extraterrestrial intelligence in the Catholic faith. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, do it, I'll publish it. But it still took a couple of years after that. So it's been a couple of years now. So really, it's something I've had a long-term interest in, maybe in part because of the generation I grew up in. I was a Star Wars kid, and or I guess I was an adult by the time Star Wars came out. But
Hey, you're
those
still a
kinds of
kid at heart. Still a kid at heart.
That's
Star
right.
Wars
That's right.
makes us all kids at hearts, right? So
That's right. So I guess if that answers your question, so it finally just seemed to be the time. Of course, things didn't happen as quickly as I'd hoped with that 2017 piece, and then the 2019 piece, which really spurred me to go on. And it did take longer than I expected because I had other work going on. It took me a couple of years. It's over 400 pages. It's got more than 550 footnotes. So that just takes a while.
that's a
To try
lot
to
of
do it in a
research.
serious, scholarly way, but to make it available as much as possible just to the everyday reader.
And I would assume with your doctorates and your expertise being a Yale University student and all, there's a lot of the pressure on your end that when you put something out like that you better have your facts straight, because the meticulous skeptics are out there and they pick apart everything. If they could find a loophole or anything to discredit you, they'll do that. And that's horrible, but that's what happens in your field of study, right?
And then the other thing is this particular field, of course. So when I'm working, people that knew me were always asking me, Paul, what are you writing these days? Because I was always writing something. And And I would just I'd usually stop and look at them and say, okay, about how old is this person? Because I found this demographic kind of divide. If they were 35, 40 or under, they had one attitude toward it. If they were older, they tended to have the other.
Oh,
So
wow.
if it's an older person, I said, well, actually, I'm writing a book about extraterrestrial intelligence and the Catholic faith. If they were older, they would say, why would you do that? As if I needed a tinfoil hat. If they were younger, and I told them the topic, they'd say, when can I read it? So that encouraged me, and I knew my audience would probably be mostly younger, but of course I do have some older readers. But um, it's such an interesting thing, as I talk about in the book, that because of a couple of generations we've had in the United States, American culture in particular, where the topic has been dismissed, even though, as my book shows, up until very recently, it was taken very seriously by almost all kinds of major intellectual figures, not just in the church, but otherwise. So it's an anomaly historically that people would take it as a subject to dismiss right away. So I knew I'd be up against some of that. And especially as an academic, I would be up against some of that. But in the end, it's important. I think it's important to Christian faith. It's important to us as human beings. If there is a reality, or at least the possibility of a reality there, we need to look at it. If there should be some kind of public disclosure or confirmation, discovery, I don't want people running around saying, I can't accept this. How do I fit this into my worldview? I want to help them with that.
Well, it's dangerous territory for sure, because I mean, it's shocking revelation for a lot of people. People that have been interested in the subject, we eased ourselves into it with different books, and as popular culture and more books came out, we got to know more and more. But shockingly, like, even admitting that we have visitors is a huge shock to the general population, much less saying that the abduction phenomenon seems to be quite popular amongst, even the Roper poll, which I keep mentioning, and the audience might be mad, but in the 1990s said it could be uh, 1 out of every 50 people could be an abductee, which globally, that is a shit ton of people. So that's the scary bit, is that we don't know what this phenomenon entails. We don't know if it's spiritual. Is it dimensional? What is it? But I was going to basically delve into this with you about philosophy would allow us to look at this a little bit from objective, subjective point of views, and look at it different theories. Would religion, especially the Catholic faith, I mean, it's quite built in. There's foundations, there's things you don't really talk about. How difficult is it for the Catholic faith to talk about this, or is it something that they're willing to talk about and say it's a possibility?
Well, Catholic Church is a big organization. It's a big church. It's what is it, 1.3 billion people or something estimated worldwide. And so when you say Catholic, you have to recognize there are some Catholics that are open and some Catholics that are not. Um, at the higher levels, it sure seems to me, higher levels of the church in the sense of the hierarchy, the administrative organization of the church, that there's an openness. And even people like Ross Coulthart has mentioned before that he thought folks of the Vatican seem to be more open than a whole lot of other people about, excuse me, about the possibility. And that's different from saying it definitely is, but just, yeah, open to the possibility. And I've had correspondence with, excuse me, Catholic academics of different kinds, scientists especially, who say, yes, I've read your book and this is great. Excuse me. So there's lots of that. And so I think the church, kind of coming from the top, Vatican is very open. You do have in the Catholic community, as in the broader Christian community, some folks who just find it hard to accept even the possibility. And I've had a few of those who've openly said, I'm leading people to hell by writing about this.
Are you
And
serious?
yeah.
Wow.
And so that some people tend to be very vehement and very passionate and vociferous, a few folks. I think for all of us, if there's something that we don't understand, we can't account for, and it makes us uncomfortable, then we want to find a quick way to write it off as something bad. And I do admit, first of all, I should say my book is not about UAP studies, really. It's more of a book that says, okay, how could the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith, if there were a discovery or disclosure of ETI, could it accommodate that understanding, that reality, without betraying its traditional faith? And my answer is an enthusiastic yes. Yes, it can. And what I base that on is two things. One is I go back into church history all the way back to the beginning and show how this has been a very serious conversation, this topic and similar ones, among Catholic theologians and other folks for 2,000 years. And they got it started in certain ways from reading the pagan philosophers. And though you have plenty of people who said, no, I don't think that this other intelligent life, you had others who were kind of questioning that. And the early critics actually were basing their ideas on Aristotle's philosophy, which was a pre-Christian philosophy. He had the notion that the earth is at the center of the universe, and there can only be one universe because that's perfection. If you had more than one universe, it would be reductive. And then they had no notion that planets could be rocky or gaseous balls in which something could live. For them, what they call planets, the word in Greek means wanderer, is that they thought they were stars in the sky, and they wandered because they didn't move along the same path that all the others did. So they had no concept of any kind of thing out there that something could even live on. And they thought there could only be one universe. So then that ruled out others. And there were plenty of Christian theologians influenced by that philosophy who would, say the same thing. But there was always the alternative, there's other people say, well, no, actually, God's really big. God is creative. He has filled the part of the world that we know with every corner with some kind of interesting and different life. It's called the principle of plenitude, of fullness. Why wouldn't he do that out there? And so you did have some people objecting. I talk about them too. But the main point I was making is that within the Catholic Church, with folks that most Catholics today would look back and recognize as very prominent in Catholic faith and teaching, that they had room in their faith for non-human intelligence that was not angels. And we have to keep in mind angels and their fallen form, the demons, are not non-human intelligence as well. But even aside from those, but they had room for that, and they didn't think it contradicted their faith. And among them was St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and then later on, lots of other folks, Cardinal Nicholas Cusa, kind of late medieval, early Renaissance, who actually went on to speculate about different kinds of inhabitants who are intelligent in other worlds, other planets. And he was quite prominent in the church at the time. You have people, saints like, my goodness, Padre Pio, probably one of the best known, who one time was interviewed and asked about that. And his reply was, of course, we're not the only intelligent. I'm paraphrasing. But so, of course, you think we're the only ones that give glory to God? There are creatures out there that are intelligent, and they give glory to God better than we do because they're not even fallen like we are. So that was, I wish I'd been the interviewer. I would have asked him, oh, Padre, is this just your kind of firm opinion, or did God show you this? Is this a revelation? You have that. You have John Paul II, St. John Paul II, being asked one time by a little girl in an audience at a church in Rome, Holy Father, what about the aliens? And he could have answered, oh, no, that's contrary to the Catholic faith. Or he could have answered, well, we don't know about that. Or he could have answered, science will have to tell us. But what he said was much simpler and I think affirming. He said, always remember, they are God's children too. As if you weren't even questioning their existence. Now, I guess you can't make too much of that. But for one thing, it does demonstrate that some of the folks who have become my adversaries in this regard, and I'm sorry that they are, who think that I'm leading people to hell, have this notion that the Catholic faith denies the existence of any non-human intelligence except angels and their fallen versions. And they'll quote some passages in the Catechism. And I go through all that in my book to show that you're kind of reading it out of context. You need to look at other things. But if John Paul II, who was the one who commissioned the Catechism, the church is kind of the book that brings together the Catholic teaching on all kinds of things, he knew it better than anyone else. And if he could answer that question, he didn't say, well, no, our faith denies it. He said, they're God's children too. So, and there are others I could mention that are in the book, but all kinds of very well-formed, very intelligent, very faithful Catholics and other Christians throughout the centuries, they did not find this to be a tinfoil hat discussion. They took it seriously, and many of them said, yes, of course, God can do that. I hope I'm not talking too much, but
No, not at
that's the
all.
point. Yeah, the point I'm making is that what I'm hoping to be able to do with the book and other discussions is to help. There have been many Christians, including some Catholics, who have been so shaped by the culture in this regard that you are to dismiss this topic and it can't be. That they're importing that into their faith and say, no, it can't be. Therefore, what? It's either government psyops or it's demons. And just making this categorical statement is all demons. And you're leading people to believe that it's not demons. And so I want them to see that, no, if you really want to hold on to the Catholic tradition and understand it, go back before the last few generations, when in part we know now from FOIA documents that the government was trying to get the culture to be dismissive of the topic and to reject it. Go back before all that, and you find, oh my goodness, someone like St. John Newman, who is a 19th century English convert, very well-known theologian, how he once said, gosh, in theological circles right now, it's almost considered a blasphemy not to believe in ETI.
Oh, really?
And so that's how different it has been for all these centuries. So if that's the case, then we need to look and say, okay, where is there room in the Christian understanding of the cosmos that would allow for this? Of course, it'd stretch our understanding of some things. We'd have lots of questions to ask. But in my book, then, after looking at the history of the conversation about it among theologians and others, then the second part of the book says, okay, given what I believe are the foundations of Catholic and other Christian teachings, once we've given that, where's there room for mystery? Where's there room for things that we don't know about yet? How would it fit into the big? And what would be the possibilities? If there was extraterrestrial intelligence on another planet, well, by definition, that's redundant. But anyway, if there was ETI, and what kind of relationship would they have to God? Would they be in the image of God the way we believe we are? Would they be in friendship with God, or would they have turned away from God the way we have and fallen? If they're fallen, what might God do because he loves them, as he loves us, to try to restore them to friendship? Would it be the same thing that happened here? Would it be something different, a different plan? Would what happened here have a ripple effect for other races out there? These are all questions that just to look at the possibilities that are possible. And then what would be the possibilities for their final destiny, what we call eschatology and theology? What is it that might be the possible end, final goal and purpose that God might have for them, just as he has one for us? Lots of great questions and fascinating stuff. But you have to, a lot of folks don't even want to start with the possibility that they could be there. It makes them so uncomfortable. They say it's all demons. It's all demons. And that's probably the biggest challenge I have today, is to get folks like that to say, all right, let's look at the bigger picture. Because for sure, I can guarantee you the Catholic Church has never made any kind of definitive statement against it. You've got people at the Vatican Observatory over the years that most folks don't even know the Catholic Church has two observatories, one in Rome and one in Arizona. Folks will say, yeah, of course, it's not contrary to the Catholic faith, and we'd love to find out about it.
And the reality of it is, I found a lot of similarities in reading the Bible, the stories, the events, specifically for people that were, let's call them the chosen ones, that were specific. And usually they were people that were kind, didn't have a mean bone, and they had empathy for others. They were good people that had good leadership skills. They were creative, and most of them were all wise people, like, Solomon and all that. Like, it's just wisdom. But there's a similarity between people that are abductees that have similar traits, that are, they love animals, they're compassionate, they don't want to hurt others, they're selected. Like, I've not met any psychopath or sociopath that have claimed to be abductees. And there's similarities as well, which mostly, it's angelic visitations at night, bright light. Even the Mary story, to me, is very akin to the abduction phenomenon. She gets a visitation beforehand, say, hey, this is going to happen. Then it happens, visitation at night. She ends up pregnant. And when Joseph was going to leave her because he thought that she had been, promiscuous, which was not allowed back then, of course, he gets a visitation at night or a dream, if you will, to say, no, no, this is true. She's telling the truth. But there's similar things like that. Even Paul, on his way to Damascus, a bright light that blinds him. I mean, there's so many themes that to me sort of correlate with the UAP phenomenon that I'm wondering if it's just our interpretation at the time had to be religious because that's our understanding of the world versus what we understand about it now. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you mentioned it. And excuse me, I do want to say that I would say that the church's understanding, my understanding that Joseph was not considering leaving Mary because he thought she was promiscuous, but he just didn't understand it and thought I'm not a good enough man to
Yeah, she's
deal with it.
crazy.
But the different ways, yeah, the different
Yeah.
ways you can do it, and saying I just I need, but and also we don't know whether she's visited at night because it just says the angel appeared to her. But aside from all that, um, what I find is there are certain similarities, and what those similarities press me to do is not to view the things in scripture and church history as kind of UAP interpreted through another lens, but in part because the people who report these things in scripture and in church history and the community that receives it don't see it as unidentified at all. They see it, they believe, yeah, this is an angel, has a specific message. It's very clear. This is what God was telling us. Those kinds of things, even in the more wild visions like in Ezekiel, it's still, this is an image of the glory of God's throne. So it wasn't to the recipients or even to the community that handed down the tradition. It wasn't unidentified at all. But for me, what's important is that these modern things that in certain ways parallel it, we should let our religious understanding of things that have happened in the past lead us to say, you know what? A lot of people reject the notion of alien existence or at least alien visitation on the grounds of science. And if we're people of faith, we already know that there are things that science can't explain, things that have happened that are beyond the realm of science, not contrary science, but beyond what we know of science, beyond what science can measure and that kind of thing. And if that's the case, then our faith should open up our eyes to the possibilities of other things that science hasn't yet been able to discover or understand, like the possibility of something being here from millions of light years away and moving quickly and going outside of what seem to be the laws of physics. So maybe another way to say it is that I'm a little reluctant. You know how it is with abduction, people who claim abductions, that often they'll tell somebody about their experience, and then the person they're talking to doesn't believe in such things. So they will say basically, oh, it was a dream or it's a hallucination or government hoax or whatever. And what they do is they say, you believe this happened to you. I don't believe in such things. Therefore, I will assign to it an explanation that I do believe in. So that kind of thing. Or even with lights, well, it's got to be swamp gas or whatever. I don't want us to do the same thing with biblical and church history where someone, St. Gemma Galgani or someone sees glowing orbs that she says, oh, these are angels that are speaking to me. To right away say, well, I don't believe in angels, but I do believe in UFOs, so it must have been a UFO. It's the same kind of, I don't want folks to dismiss the Christian experience and before that, the Jewish experience. As something that must have been UAP when their whole tradition says, no, it wasn't unidentified at all. We know what it was. We know who it was. And to respect that at least, without just wholesale trying to reinterpret all that as UAP stuff. Does that make sense?
It does. And I really appreciate that point of view as well. I found like I spoke with a lot of people that are part of a faith or Christian faith that are abductees. There was even two gentlemen when I first started that came on, and they had specifically interviewed people of faith that were very active in the church but were abductees, and how they interpret these things because it is disruptive. It doesn't fit the narrative of like, well, how does this fit with my faith? Because it appears demonic to them because it's an invasion of, it's a violation. Let's just face it. It's a major violation of not only your person, but your entity, the very core of your person. And they must interpret it, as a lot of them do, as demons, which, we're hearing that a lot more now too within the circuit behind the scenes, that there may be a spiritual, demonic, angelic sort of presence behind this whole thing. I think it's huge. I think whatever it is, it's more than just interdimensional and non-human entities, but that there's multiple layers behind that, that the further we go, the more mind-blowing it is. And that's a scary bit. People are not prepared for that.
And I fully agree. I mean, when people ask me, what do you think it actually is? You know, is it ETI? Is it interdimensional? Is it time travel? I just say it could be all the above. All I know is it's such a big phenomenon that and it acts in different ways and people experience it in different ways. That leads me to believe that it is different things happening. And I will tell the folks who, you know, tell me it's all demons. I'll say, well, I agree with you. There's some of the experiences sure seem demonic. So for instance, someone whose name you recognize, but he said it on our podcast, but I'll just say who had been involved with Skinwalker Ranch, had talked about with a hitchhiker phenomenon. Your viewers probably know about that something malevolent seems to follow them, and how at one point the thing kind of seized him and he froze and then spoke with another voice through his body. Anybody, I've written books about demonic powers and possessions and stuff like that. Anybody who knows that stuff knows that sounds like a classic diabolical possession case. I'm not saying he was, but I am saying when you get a case like that, or when the things are, no matter what they claim to be, when they're hurtful, they're manipulative, sexual assault, that kind of thing, I'm more than willing to say, yes, some of those probably are demonic that are kind of pretending to be ETI. But it's a big leap to go from that yes, some of them almost certainly are, to saying no matter what it is, all these things, including the cubes with the spheres inside and all the other stuff, that it's all demons.
Good point.
You just can't make that leap.
Yeah, and even was it in the 16th century or 17th century when I think it was a small town in Germany when they had all these orbs. Seemed like they've been having a fight over the city, and it lasted a long time. And you know, even from a religious point of view, is that angels and demons fighting each other? If it's interdimensional, extraterrestrial fights, who knows? Yeah. What I like the concept about faith is that faith exists on a realm that you cannot see but exists and is told to exist. These angels, these demons, wherever they are, they come from a different dimension, but they can operate within our dimension and come at will. The angels appear upon, to people all the time. Recently, I mean, it's a lot of, people are, even there was a Muslim gentleman that said that Jesus saved them from captivity from terrorists that were holding him captive. And I was like, wow, I'm blown away by that. People are having these amazing encounters that nobody's talking about. So we have the UAP issue, but we also have this spiritual issue that we're not talking about. And it seems like we're dampening it these days. A lot more people leaving the church, less people willing to commit to the foundation of Christianity. And I wonder if that's going to play a huge part in disclosure and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, you've a large part of our culture now is what I would call post-Christian. They often were raised in a Christian setting, for whatever reason decided to leave that, and now the kind of assumption for them is, if anybody talks about a Christian viewpoint, they'll say, "Oh, been there, done that. I'm past that." And part of what I want to do with folks like that is to invite and say, "I understand, that happened to me," but first of all, the interpretation you may have been given of Christian faith in the beginning might have not really been fully Christian, or might have been, warped in certain ways by the culture. And second, I don't think you should just throw it out. You might want to reconsider in certain ways, because at least the Catholic version of the Christian faith, Catholic Christian faith, does accommodate, or can accommodate, all these things. It's not in conflict with science. Modern science owes a lot to the Catholic Church and to Catholic thinkers, and so whatever version you might have of Christianity you might have started out with, encourage you not to just think of that as the only possible Christian perspective. That there could be something broader, deeper, more nuanced, more complex in its understanding of reality. And that's what I've found in the Catholic Church. That's why I became Catholic 31 years ago. That it seemed to me that it really did encompass not just fundamentals of Christian thought that I'd always had believed for some time, but it had the potential of accommodating all kinds of intellectual complexity and richness and the experience of the world. There's a lot of room for mystery in the Catholic view of the cosmos, and a lot of room for one of the things I said in my talk at this whole symposium was that what I urge Christians to do not only is to kind of rediscover the Christian tradition that is open to this, so that they know that's you can be faithful Christian and be open to this, but at the same time, they need to stretch their imaginations a little bit, because there is so much about the world that God has created, and by world I mean the cosmos, the universe, that we don't know about. We've discovered incredibly amazing things all along, and we need an imagination that's rich enough and nuanced enough to encounter new things in this universe that He's given us, and to make room for that, instead of saying, nope, I got it all figured out. It's all demons. Don't talk to me about any of this stuff. I don't care how many hundreds of thousands of people have had this experience. Don't want to talk about it. I've got it all figured out. Basically, I don't think that's a Christian attitude. I think that's it lacks humility. In the book, I talk about in my book, I talk about the book of Job in the Bible, and not going into the whole story, but there's one place where Job, who's suffering so many things, and he can't figure out why God would let all that happen. And so he turns to God and he starts talking. He's complaining, and what about this? What about that? What about that? And then when it's God's turn to talk, his first reply was, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Were you the one who threw the constellation Orion out there and scattered the stars across the sky and all these other things? And Job just says, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, of course there are things too high for me. I repent. And that's the God we need. He's our God. He's the one we know. We need to recall that there are all kinds of things in this great cosmos we haven't discovered yet, but there are good things that He's created. And so we need to open our minds to the possibilities if they don't contradict the things that we know as foundations of our faith, and they don't. So yeah, I encourage people, you need humility, you need wonder, a sense of wonder. And the way I define wonder is that's humility in the face of mystery. You encounter mystery, and if you allow yourself to have a sense of wonder instead of fear, then what you're doing is exhibiting humility in the face of mystery. I can't understand it. All I can do is marvel at it and try to understand.
And experience it, right? That's the point, is to experience it. Whether or not this, whatever it is, we're experiencing it, not only as civilians, but many people within the military experience it, people within the CIA experience it. So there's got to be high priests within the Catholic Church that are experiencing this as well. There's no way that because there's no exemption. There's no, they don't judge, they don't discriminate. There's specific people they go after. It doesn't matter what your profession is. There's judges and executives in Hollywood, for crying out loud. Have you heard any of that behind the scenes in the Catholic Church? Like, is there anybody that's come forward and say have had experiences, or is that sort of taboo still? They don't talk about it.
I don't know, taboo, but just it's more of a cultural thing that people will dismiss me, especially if you're a priest and you're liable to stir up controversy about that. Your attitude would be, I've got these really important things to share and to help to be a shepherd of these people. And if I throw that out and it divides my congregation and turns the attentions away from the really central things, that's probably not a good thing. But I will say, if there are priests out there who have had encounters, who have seen things that they know are not human and intelligent, not the things themselves, but the craft. I know one priest personally, and there are priests who have heard, we can't talk specifics, but have heard confessions, from people, and they can say generally, yes, I've had people say to me before they've encountered this thing and they don't know how to fit it into their faith. It's turning their life upside down. How much the Catholic hierarchy, the higher levels of the church knows, that's a matter of debate. Don't even want to go there unless you want. I mean, if you want to go there, we can, but just a lot of speculation about how much the church at the highest levels might know, but has had, for its own reasons, decided to let some secular state be the first to say something.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Like what information you kind of know on that? Because that's deep.
Well, going back to David Grush's testimony, which I'm sure probably most of your viewers are familiar with, the whistleblower, he mentioned a case that he talked about with Russ Coulthart in his interview that had actually arisen some decades back, been made public, in which the claim was that 1933, I think it was, that there was a UFO crash in Magenta, Italy, which is not too far from Milan in northern Italy, and that Mussolini, who was dictator at the time, quickly grabbed the thing, put it away somewhere, and held on to it for study and other things. The part of the story is that Marconi, everybody knows the inventor of the Italian Marconi, that he was one of the ones put on the case to try to study. And that then in 1944, toward the end of the Second World War, when Mussolini's government fell apart, Mussolini was executed publicly by his own people. And the things were falling apart, the Italian government, and who knew what the Germans were going to try to do. They were common knowledge in certain levels that the Germans were also trying to work on this kind of stuff, that the Russians were interested in it. And so the word got to Pope Pius the 12th, who, what about this thing? What if it gets in the wrong hands? I mean, I'm kind of adding my speculation to it, but the claim is that the Pope actually acted as a liaison between Italy and the U.S. government, so that the U.S. government could get possession of the craft and take it back to the U.S. And people ask, well, why would he do that? Well, put yourself in that situation. Europe's falling apart. You definitely don't want the Nazis to get their hands on it.
No,
You don't
no.
want the Russians to get their hands on it. You don't even want the mafia to get their hands on it and sell it to the highest bidder. So if it were a real thing, and out of his position, I'd probably say, okay, is there one major actor that has the resources to recover this thing, take it out of the hands of those other folks and hold on to it and maybe do some good with it? And I too would have probably said, yeah, the United States. So that's the claim. Again, it was made decades ago, and there are questions about the authenticity of the documents that were shown. So a lot of people just wrote that off as a hoax. When David Grush then said, no, it happened real. I did talk to, not to him directly about this, but to Ross Coulthart, who interviewed him, and said, okay, does he have more information than what was made public before? What was made public before doesn't really seem to most of us to be enough to convince us of its authenticity. And he said, yes, he has more. So I'm certainly willing. I mean, I know with Grush, there's a possibility that at least some of the people reporting to him might have had misinformation or disinformation. I'm not saying everything he said was true. I believe he told the truth about everything. Maybe he was misinformed by people. On this particular case, I'm certainly willing to be open to the possibility that, yes, the Vatican was involved in a crash retrieval. So the next question then becomes, okay, why wouldn't the Pope say that to the world? Hey guys, we got a UFO here. Well, first of all, for some of the reasons we just talked about, the way world politics were there. But even aside from different groups that would have been trying to get a hold of it, what would it do, in the midst of the end of a long war, Europe is in ruins, all that, to make this announcement that would just stun everybody on top of all the other suffering that we're going through? I think I would have said, no, this is not the time. And but people will say, well, they're trying to, they wouldn't say anything because it would undermine their faith. And that's the point of my book. No, I don't think it would at all. But so is there a possibility? Yeah, I think there's a possibility the church doesn't know. The other thing is that, like I said, you get the reports of so many people who are Catholics, have this experience, and then they say, I went to my priest to tell him because it just upset me. So if you're a priest hearing that in general, now you can't repeat what an individual said in the confessional, but if it were happening several times or something, you might well go to your bishop and say, I just want you to know about this. And somewhere in the bishop's office, the chancery might say, maybe Rome needs to know about this. And I can imagine reports kind of making their way up to the top. The Vatican also has a pretty good intelligence network itself. And so anything like
it's its
this,
own city, its own
yeah,
country,
right?
right? Yeah.
And it's paranormal, so a lot of people would automatically say, okay, is this something spiritual? Take it to the priest or take it to the bishop, or let's report it to Rome. So I can imagine that the Vatican might have had an interest in this for some time, that there might be things in their archive about this. But that doesn't bother me as a Catholic. Again, I can see reasons why it wouldn't have been reported then. Uh, I wish at the very least right now that the Vatican would be willing to say, at the very least, it's not contrary to Catholic teaching, the possibility of it, so that at least some of the people who are damning me literally would at least be able to, you couldn't say that anymore. But beyond that, I'd love to hear the church say it, and we think it's possible. Don't imagine at this point that they would be the first to say, and we have evidence of it. But I can imagine if we get to a place where multiple secular governments, states, are openly disclosing this, I can imagine the Vatican saying, yes, we can confirm that. And but I'm not speaking for the Vatican at all. Again, for me, the main point is that I'm convinced that Catholic tradition, teaching, devotion could accommodate this reality. But I don't think that Catholic teaching can tell us anything specifically about any particular case, is it real or not, unless it's something that follows a classic diabolical possession profile.
You were thinking about Jesus. Jesus was a radical because he would educate people, correct people on the Bible or the what they had at the time for the Word of God, and they didn't like that. They're like, "How dare you correct?" And he goes, "No, it says this, but this is the meaning." And he was wise, but he kept telling people, he kept shocking people by saying, "No, actually, your concept is wrong. This is," and it was a teaching of like, what you understand about God is not 100% correct. It was written by men. I'm here to make those corrections. And there's a huge dynamic shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And the reason is because of the teachings of Jesus were so out of the norms and bounds of the people at the time. They were oppressed by the Romans. The church controlled everything. What were they called? The priests at the time? I forgot the name. Starts with a P or something.
You mean like the Jewish Sadducees and Pharisees and
Yeah.
yeah,
and they hated his teachings. Why? Because it went against their fundamental understanding of things. So even his approach, and they ended up wanting him dead, and they killed him, right? And that's because of the ideas, the concepts. If it's a threat to our understanding, like the box that we shape in our minds of what, the metaphysical world is, which we have no idea. We're very limited on understanding anything because of our five senses are very limited. And that's the only way we can navigate the world. But he taught us differently, to think differently, to understand things differently. His parables were short and sweet because he knows our attention span are like that of TikTok. He was the original TikTok of the Bible because he kept it short and sweet, straight to the point. But it was wise. And I think wise people can wrap their heads around understanding that if you are a creator, like I'm an artist, I paint, I draw. I'm not going to just do one painting. I'm going to do as many paintings as I can while I got time. It's the same thing. If he's the great creator, do you think he just stopped and says, my job here is done? No, he's still creating. So that idea, that concept is what I sort of adhere to. And even though I walked away from my faith, I still think the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament are brilliant. And if anything, it teaches you to have compassion and understanding that you are going to go through trials and tribulations. And that means you should be compassionate to those who are also going through it or worse. And that's not a way we live today. I really would love to see that more. So I encourage anybody to read it because it does something to you. It will change you. Those words are great. And it resonates after 2,000 years. But it's a reconciliation of saying, okay, and this exists in the same realm as multiple, like you mentioned, could be all of the above, being here, visiting us. Kinetic coexists in that same realm. And what I found, Paul, is that with the abductees, if they mention Jesus or they pray, they don't belittle that. They don't seem to dismiss it. Like they respect the spiritual aspect of people. And I could only assume it's for the other religions in the world as well. But there's no like, oh, God isn't real or anything like that. They don't seem to do that to people. Have you heard anything like that within the Catholic faith or in your research?
I don't. To be honest, I haven't personally talked. I've read accounts. I haven't personally talked to anyone who's certainly a traditional Catholic who says that they've had such an experience. I probably know some and don't realize it. I do know some people, especially from maybe an evangelical background, who have claimed that when they had an experience and whatever the entity was there, I like to call it a creature because entity is too vague for me. When I say creature,
And threatening,
that
right? It sounds
implies there is a
threatening.
creator. The creature has a creator. So no matter what it is, God created it, even if it's become evil or is evil. So that, the claim, and I don't dispute the claim that they would say something like, in the name of Jesus Christ, leave me alone, and it would vanish. Now, in a case like that, again, I'm willing to say that, yeah, that may very well be something demonic masquerading as something alien, because there is power in the name of Jesus. I've written books about that too, the power of Christ over demons. So yeah, I know there's some people who've had that experience and they have concluded it's demonic, and in their case, it probably is. But just with others, a lot of times all it does is just kind of expand the world and say, okay, now I know there are things out there I don't understand. You do have, sometimes where the creatures, will say whatever they've seen, will say something like, yeah, you've all got it wrong and this is the truth. And that I would say, okay, well, let's examine. We could have creatures show up on the White House lawn tomorrow, and they would come to say, we want to tell you that all your earthly religions are wrong and this kind of stuff. And I would say, oh, really? Let's talk about that. Because just because somebody who's higher advanced technologically than we are has a particular religion doesn't mean it's the right religion either. There's some people who have said that, actually, that if I won't name names, but you might recognize some of them, that if they're that far advanced technologically, then they must have overcome all their conflicts and stuff. So they must be at a higher moral level and a higher spiritual level than we are. So whatever they would say if they showed up would have to be the truth, and it would rule out all of our religions. Now, that's not the case at all. I mean, we think how much higher advanced we are in technology today than people were 5,000 years ago. And are we really any better morally as a whole? Technological advance is not the same thing as moral advance. You have individuals, of course, but you have them too. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but yeah, I'd love to meet more people who have a Christian background that have had an experience one way or another. Again, that's not the focus of my study. My focus has been theological and historical. This is something that Catholics and other Christians could accommodate without betraying their faith. I mean, so often people will say things like, well, it's not in the Bible, so it can't be. And I'd say, well, dinosaurs and duck-billed platypus and molecules and microbes aren't in the Bible either, but it's not intended to be a comprehensive scientific textbook. So I mean, that's an easy one to answer. There are other objections made, but and they'll come up with questions. I think Pope Francis even asked this before, and others. Would you baptize an alien? See, if the aliens come down, would you baptize them? And I mentioned this at the Soul Symposium talk I was presenting, and just a kind of a whimsical answer. I said, well, like most hypothetical questions, the answer depends largely on the details of the hypothesis. So you ask, would I baptize an alien? Well, I would say, let's imagine that we are living a real life version of the movie Signs. And maybe most of you viewers know that one, where the
Great
crop
movie.
circles and stuff. And it is. It's a great movie. And a real life version of that, where the aliens are hostile, they're invading, and they die upon contact with water. So I said, in
On
that
a
case,
water
if that's
planet,
the case,
yeah.
I'd say baptize them all right away. So, I mean, so making a joke out of it, but the truth is that so much would depend on the particulars of a situation. Would the creature ask for it? Would the creature understand what it means? Would they, all kinds of things. So
The concept, the morality of it, the living example of it going forward, I think that's it's the comprehension of the idea and the lifestyle that you devote yourself to, I think, is the most important part. But if it says, if anyone comes on to me, it means anyone, any entity comes on to me, you'll get it. So that's my understanding of it. But I was going to mention, just as you were talking, this random stuff was coming through my mind, but you were talking about, a species that overcame their differences. From what my understanding is, a lot of these entities are telepathic and they feel what you feel, like they're constantly tapped into you as this experience happened. And I could only assume they're tapped to everybody else. Even the aerial school phenomenon, when that little entity spoke to 60 kids at the same time, telepathically, each one different messages, that is a sign of holy crap intelligence. But if they're capable of that, that means that they're incapable of hurting another person without feeling that hurt themselves. So working together would make them advance a far more faster than us because we're individualistic and we don't feel other people's emotions. This led me to this. In the Old Testament, it says that, you know, the really the first sin committed was Eve eating from the fruit that gave her knowledge of good and evil. And it separated her from Adam because now she knew something he didn't. She had emotions. I think that's what the you know, the hatred, the love, everything was built in. Adam ate it too. They both had knowledge. What was the second sin? Was murder. So first thing they did with the knowledge of good and evil was a murder, was Cain killing Abel because he was jealous. Um, and that to me just shows that the division of not having that sympathy for others, to not be able to have empathy for others. And we see that so rampant in our species. And I always think maybe that's going to stop us from being able to progress faster than we should. And, you know, right now the world is regressing, Paul. Our ideas, our concept, knowledge that we used to have is saying, no, no, it's not real now. Whatever you want, throw in unicorns and glitter and it's good to go. And that hinders us in progress. And that's my biggest fear, is that with the knowledge of good and evil, like we have emotions, we have egos, we have tempers. It gets messy with emotions. The lack of emotion seems to be the better way to go, but probably not the best way to live. These entities seem to have no emotions, but they seem to be empathetic to our emotions. So if we have fear, they try to calm us down. I don't always hear about, you know, obviously there's pain involved in these abductions, but there's always like kind of like, it's okay. It's okay. Like it's almost like a soothing thing. Like they don't want us to panic while we're there. But so that's what I'm trying to reconcile. It's like, well, I don't necessarily see them as evil because there are acts of compassion, even when they healed people. I have a recent case where they took out the appendix because the person was having appendicitis. While they were in there, they took it out. So do you have a theory about, you know, personally for yourself, not as a scholar or you know, a researcher, but do you have sort of an idea if you think they're benign, nice, or something else?
Well, it's kind of like we said before. I think the possibility, there's such a broad phenomenon and people's experiences, not just in, you know, abductee claims, but in other things are so variable, that I think it's likely that we're dealing with different things. And even aside from the things that look kind of clearly demonic or diabolical, I could imagine, and part of what I explore in the book is, okay, if you have these intelligent creatures made by God out there, what are the possibilities for their moral status, as well as their spiritual status? And if they have, at least some of them, turned away from God, then you could have creatures that are malevolent. You could have other creatures who are unfallen, and like the angels, then have only our good in mind. You could have ones like humans who are fallen, but are still doing their best in a broken situation to help people. So you've got this mix of, could have a mix of motivations, even within the same extraterrestrial species. How much more so if we're dealing with different species? You could you could be dealing with things that either are diabolical or might as well be. You could be dealing with a species that is unfallen, that never had their own kind of fruit and tree in the garden experience. You could be dealing with ones that have been unaware of certain things about God, but so that they're not perfect, but they're on their way. It could be all of those. But I would say that coming from a Catholic position and my own position, I wouldn't say that the kind of feelings were the result of the fall. Depends on how you define feelings, of course, but someone like St. Augustine would say, and he was agreeing in certain ways, I think, with Greek philosophers, that that the rational soul, the soul that has reason and free will, that when it sees something good, perceives something good, that it loves it. It loves the good naturally, and kind of reaches out for it. And that reaching out for it is love, desire. Same thing, it perceives something as bad and it has an aversion to it. And that we would call could call fear, it may be hatred, that kind of thing. And that's just natural to us to have those emotions. What happened in the fall was the emotions became disordered, and we began to perceive things wrong. We think, the man looks at the woman and all he can see is an object of desire instead of another human being of great dignity. And so he will try to use her sexually. That's an example of what I'm talking about with she is good. She's a good creature God has made, and her beauty is good. But you look at that and your disordered love says it's more important to me to have pleasure than it is to
It's
respect
twisted. Yeah, it's twisted.
Right. Yeah. And as Augustine would say, they're kind of out of order. We're supposed to love God most, and then people, and then things. So if you love things more than people, it's going to be disordered love. If you're going to love even things and people more than God, it's going to be disordered. The example he gives is if he says a thief, people would say a thief robs people because he doesn't love. He doesn't have love. Well, Augustine would say, oh, he has love, but he has love for money. And he loves money more than he loves the people he's robbing from. And he loves it more than God, who's told him not to do that because it's wrong. And so it's a love because, possessions in themselves are good things, usually created good things. But to love them more than to love people, that's a disordered love. So all that to say, I could see that happening in alien races as well. But I don't know that they would be without feelings. Maybe God, he might create a race kind of like Spock, Spock's race, Star Trek, who doesn't have feelings. But at least in the human situation, feelings in themselves are good things. It's just if we let them get disordered and we're controlled by them.
I think
That's my thought.
the only people on this planet that have no feelings are big CEO of corporations that lay off people at whim just to be able to get big bonuses. Those are the only people.
Well, I won't go there, but we can talk about a few politicians too, but we won't.
But it's true. It's psychopaths
Yeah.
tend to rise at those levels, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
they're the ones who are running the world. So it's not good. Often when people are saying, would you want aliens to come here and tell us how to live? Well, I'll give them an ear. I'll listen to them. What do you got to say? Because it's not working our way. And clearly throughout history, I mean, it's been the same. But anybody who comes with a good heart, and there's many people that have come with a good heart, they get attacked, especially by the people like that don't want to hear it. And I think the UAP issues, even with the people that are running the programs, I'm not saying they're all psychopaths, but there's definitely psychopaths in there that the interest is for themselves and for the military establishment. And I don't know what this is going to lead in 2024, 2025. What else is going to come out? But I do want to hear more about the spiritual aspect of this phenomenon, because I think we're talking nuts and bolts. We're talking abduction, but nobody's talking about the spiritual aspect and what it does to people. There's so many people that are affected, like their whole lives. It's not just the story of what happened, the repercussions of it. It destroyed their lives. They lost their families, divorced, lost their jobs, and throughout history. So it is a big case. It is a big deal. And I just hope that people of any faith, especially the Christian faith, can open up to it. I've had difficulties with people in my life that are very fundamentally Christian that just cannot fathom the possibility of what's happening. And I think they're the people that are going to take this the worst when big event like 1997 Phoenix Lights happen again. It's going to be a whole panic, and they're not going to be able to reconcile the two. And that's my biggest fear. But you seem to be doing that work. You seem to be trying to help them out.
I'm trying. I do feel compassion for them because some of them are my friends,
Yeah.
Not the ones that condemn me, but the ones who say, no, that can't be, it's got to be demons. I do feel compassion for them because if there is a disclosure or confirmation or whatever you want to call it, however it comes about, I don't want them to be in this situation where, oh no, that destroys everything I believe. I believe nothing now. My life is disaster. It's all turned upside down. And where do I turn? I'm all depressed. Who knows?
It's all lies, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
The mentality.
I don't believe anybody anymore, and that kind of thing. I have compassion for them. I don't, even if they post themselves as my adversaries now, it's okay. If and when that disclosure confirmation happens, I want to be able to say, let me come alongside you and help you work this out. Let's take my book. Let's read and talk, because it doesn't have to destroy your life this way.
Yeah. Well said, Paul. So Paul Thigpen is our guest today, guys. Please look up his book. It's called Extraterrestrial Intelligence in a Catholic Faith. We are alone. We are alone in the universe with God.
Are we alone?
Are we alone?
Good
I'm
question.
sorry. My writing is so bad. Uh, I'll put the link for the book on the episode description as well. I want to send a shout out to Brett Ward. He reached out to me recently, a listener from Washington. He didn't expect that I was going to reply to him, as much as I did. But I did. I reply to everybody, and it surprises people sometimes because I know some people in our community don't do that. But I care. I care about the listeners. I care about the guests, and it's about learning and expanding our reality without egos. And that's really the point of the podcast. Paul, let's have you back on again, sir. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, and I love your interest in this, and I really appreciate the work in the book that you've written. I know it's not an easy path, especially when you're in tight circles with, very fundamentally Catholic or Christian-based people, but this needs to happen. People like yourself need to step up and say, I'm gonna take this on. I have to. Nobody else is doing it, right? It's a huge thank you from us and the listeners for your time today, my man. It's awesome to have you on.
Jason, you're kind, and thank you. This has been a delight. I love the questions you've asked and the good conversation we've had. So,
And it won't be the
more than
last, my
a-
man. Yeah, it won't be the last. I'll keep in touch.
Okay.
I hope to run out into you one. I'm trying to get out to Contact in the Desert this year. It's the 10th anniversary. And I'm going to meet a lot of people in person for the first time. I know them, but I've never seen them in person, and get to hang out with them, maybe go out for dinner once in a while, see their speeches. But I'm trying to get out there. It's been 4 years. I've never done any of these things. So, but I hope to run into you in one of these conventions one of these days as well. I'll keep your contact information. And guys, for sure, look at his book, read it. It is important that we look at this side of ufology, all sides of ufology, but this book is amazing, and this is why we had Paul on today, and we'll be right back with another episode of UAP Studies Podcast.